Hello again, year 10. We're going to start looking at the nervous system today. So our focus is going to be looking at the layout of the nervous system, thinking about the main features of a neuron, and comparing and contrasting them in terms of sensory and motor neurons. We'll also look at something called relay neurons, and we're also going to think about the nervous pathway, what it is, and look at some examples. So you have got, as part of your work, some advanced organizer to help you construct your notes for today's lesson. So as we go through the slides, you can complete that as we go through. So the first thing I want to think about is, well, what's the nervous system there for? What's it made up of? And what does it do? So you've got this diagram on your sheet. Can you label some of these structures? I mean, some of them have got label lines. You've got the brain, spinal cord, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, spinal nerves and cranial nerves. You might be able to use your textbook or a little bit of quick research. What can you come up with to explain them? What's the role of the central nervous system? What is the role of the peripheral nervous system? And what type of neurons are found in them? Okay, give yourselves 5, maybe 10 minutes if you want to do some research. Pause the video here. Okay, so if we think about the layout of the nervous system then, you've got your brain and your spinal cord. These make up your central nervous system, and your brain's and spinal cord's job is to take information from your receptors, your senses if you like, from the receptors, and coordinate what needs to be done because of changes in the environment to bring about a response. And the nervous system's function is to do that and to respond to rapidly changing stimuli in the environment to keep the body safe or to find food or whatever it might be that the organism needs to do. Okay, you have nerves that run out from the spinal cord, which are called spinal nerves. So really fairly obvious. So in between each vertebrae, there's a little disc, padding material, collagen and things like that, separating the bones from each other, and there are gaps in the vertebrae from which the spinal cord branches out into big bundles of nerves which contain both sensory and motor neurons. These are big bundles, a bit like a cable with loads of wires inside, and there's a mixture of sensory and motor neurons in there that come out from the spinal cord and go to wherever they need it. So for example, you can see ones coming up quite high up sort of near the neck here. These ones are coming down and going down to the arms. Okay, and you have pairs. If you notice, they're paired. So if there's one coming out on the right hand side of this person here, there's also, actually I don't know which way this is facing, it doesn't really matter. You've also got one coming out the left. Okay, so they are called your spinal nerves, and they're a mixture of sensory and motor neurons. So neurons are the cells that make up your nerves, along with other cells that bundle together. Okay, you've also got some nerves that come directly from the brain, either going directly to the brain or coming directly from it, and they're called cranial nerves. So you can imagine things like ones for your eyes, for example. Okay. So as I said, the central nervous system is the coordinator. In other words, it deals with information coming in. So the nerve impulses are being sent down sensory neurons towards the central nervous system that have been originated at receptors, and they will be going and making junctions with other cells within the central nervous system, which are called relay neurons, and they will determine where the nerve impulse goes to next, whether a nerve impulse is stimulated somewhere else, and then bring about some sort of response via things called effectors. Effectors are things like your muscles and your glands. So the muscles in your arm, the muscles in your blood vessels that can constrict or dilate your blood vessels, or in your digestive system to make the food move through your gut, or your heart muscle, which is another different type of muscle. Okay. And then you've got your glands, so think about your salivary glands, and you've got glands in your pancreas secreting enzymes, glands in your liver secreting bile, all those sorts of things. You've also got actually some nervous system also affects your endocrine system as well, which is quite interesting as well. So glands and muscles are effectors, and they are going to bring about some sort of change in the body. Okay, so your central nervous system is doing the coordination. The peripheral nervous system is basically your sensory and motor neurons taking nerve impulses to the central nervous system or away from it towards effectors. Okay, peripheral means round the outside. Okay, so take a few minutes to make sure that any notes you want from this slide that augmented your own notes. Okay, so I want to look at neurons with you now. So you've got two pictures. One of them, there's only a motor neuron, a sensory neuron shown here. Okay, I want you to have a good look at them. Look at what they're made of. All right, and think about how would you identify these neurons. Okay, so try and describe their structure in terms of their size, how they're differentiated. Where's the cell body? Okay, what's wrapped around the cell? Think about how you can distinguish between the two of them. Think about what the role of each one is. Okay, and also see if you can find out what the fatty sheath is there for. Okay, so have a good look, have a think about these questions. This screen's going to disappear and then you can see the pictures again properly. Have a think for 2 minutes or so. Okay, so just looking at our pictures here, remember these are cells, so they have a nucleus, they have a cell membrane. This purple stuff running down the middle is basically the cytoplasm of the cells. This is all cytoplasm. You've got the cell membrane sort of marks the edge of the cell. These are things called dendrites, which are very thin branches of the cell membrane. So there's little tiny bits of cytoplasm in here, okay, and cell membrane. Making loads of branches, and again at this end there are branches. In our sensory neuron we've got dendrites here and dendrites here, and then we've got this long structure. This is not really very well to scale because a neuron, the cell body makes up a tiny proportion really of the neuron. The axons can be very long in a motor neuron because they'll be running from the central nervous system. So at this end here we'd have the central nervous system, and there'll be other neurons called relay neurons making connections called synapses with these dendrites. And then the nerve impulse, which is, if you ever read in the A-level text, which is called an action potential. It's an electrical impulse that runs down the axon. And then at this end it says the motor end plate. Well, this is where the effector would be. So this here is a diagram of a bundle of muscle tissue. Okay, and this can be meter long or more. If you think about a motor neuron running maybe from the base of your spinal cord in the central nervous system all the way down your leg to some muscles in your foot, it might be over a meter long. Okay, and notice, so the central nervous system will be here, the effector will be here, so the nerve impulse runs that way. In the sensory neuron, okay, we've got the direction of travel of the nerve impulse here. The receptor would be here. This would be receptor, so it might be a rod cell in the eye, it might be a thermoreceptor in the skin, or a chemoreceptor in your nose or your tongue, okay, or a pressure sensor called a Pacinian corpuscle. Whatever it is, some sort of receptor will be here. Lots of little branches, so there might be multiple junctions with multiple receptors, and then nerve impulse flows down here. Now for GCSE this is all just called an axon, but actually this bit before the cell body is called a dendron, and then this is the axon here. But for that GCSE, this is fine. You'll notice that this thing called the dendron is very long, but actually the axon's quite short. This would be the connection at this end, would be the connection with the central nervous system. So there'll be synapses here with relay neurons within the central nervous system. Now, look at where the cell body is in different positions. So in a motor neuron, it's at the end of the cell and is actually inside the central nervous system. When we look at reflexes later on, you'll see that it's inside the central nervous system within the spinal cord. Whereas actually the cell body here in the sensory neuron is actually just outside, would be found just outside the central nervous system, and but this relatively short axon here would then go into the central nervous system and make connections via these dendrites to relay neurons. Okay, notice there are no dendrites on a cell body of a sensory neuron, but there are dendrites that come from the cell body here because literally they're making direct connections with relay neurons at the start and the cell body is at the beginning of a motor neuron. There is no dendron in a motor neuron, but there is a dendron here, but for GCSE you can just call it an axon. Okay. You've also got these, can you see these pink bits here? Each pair of pink bits is one cell called a Schwann cell, and you can just call it the fatty sheath. So there's cells here, multiple cells that wrap around, a bit like kitchen roll around the cardboard tube in the kitchen roll or toilet roll, whatever it is. The cells grow around and wrap around the neuron and insulate it. So they help prevent electrical contamination from one neuron to another, and actually they speed up nervous transmission. So myelination is really important in making your nerve impulses travel more quickly down the axon, and actually if they get damaged and get lost, they slow down nerve impulses and they're not transmitted as well along the axon, and so diseases like multiple sclerosis are actually caused by damage to the fatty sheath or the myelin sheath. Okay. Here's another similar picture. So here's a sensory neuron. You can see here they've got the cell body sticking out to the side, and they have sort of slightly oversimplified this, then they've got almost equal length before and after the cell body, whereas actually if this was a receptor here, this bit would be long and this bit would be short if this was the central nervous system. Relay neurons, their cell body actually tends to be bang in the middle, so rather than sticking out to the side, it tends to be part of the main structure. This one's showing it with a quite long projections, dendrons and axons. Some of the books will just show them like quite a big cell, almost like just a motor neuron but without the axon. So depending on what book or what sites you look at on the internet, they might be different. You don't really need to worry about relay neurons. What you really just need to know is that they connect really within the central nervous system, between sensory neurons to motor neurons, and also making multiple connections with other neurons within the central nervous system. And there's our motor neuron with a big cell body at the end, and then the axon running away, and then you'd have the effector down here. Okay, so what I'd like you to do from all that information is annotate your diagrams, write some bullet point notes to outline the features, think about their role is and how they carry and transmit the nerve impulse, in what direction, where from and where to, and actually you can do that by completing the table on your worksheet. Remember, in your textbook, pages 134 and 135 might be of use. Give yourself maximum 10 minutes on that. So hopefully you got some of these key things. So reminder, they are animal cells, so they have cell membrane, nucleus, cytoplasm. They also have lots of mitochondria, so you could actually draw those into some of your diagrams, because it's really important to remember structures. You could even draw in some ribosomes if you want, to remind them that they'll also be making proteins, but this sending nerve impulse is really energy requiring, so you'd have lots of mitochondria because they'll be doing lots of aerobic respiration. So a nice link to the bioenergetics topic here, so make that link. Okay, but as we said, the sensory neuron has a cell body to the side, a big long dendron, a short axon, but again that's more if you can do A levels, really important, not so important here. Okay, they don't have dendrites on the cell body. The cell body is just outside the central nervous system. The relay neuron, cell body is generally centrally within it, have lots of branches, lots of dendrites. Okay, and the motor neuron has the cell body at the end of the neuron, doesn't have a dendron, big long axon, and lots of branches coming from the cell body as well as at the other end of the axon as well. And the cell body is inside the central nervous system. And the reason why I'm getting you to think about this is not that you're going to be asked necessarily to compare the structure of a sensory and motor neuron. Could happen, less likely, but you might be shown diagrams that are unusual and different to ones we've done in class, and you being able to recognize, oh, I know that this is a motor neuron because of these things I can see, that will help you when you're looking at diagrams. Okay, and you've always got to think about it's not just about rote learning, it's about understanding what things look like and their structure and how that will help you think about the context of a question, whatever it might be. So your sensory neurons generally in your peripheral nervous system, obviously they do connect into the CNS, but they're part of your peripheral nervous system really. Relay neurons within the central nervous system, and motor neurons again in peripheral. The direction of travel is from receptors to the CNS for the sensory neurons, within the CNS and between sensory and motor neurons for relay neurons, and from the central nervous system towards the effectors. And the myelin sheath is really important in speeding up transmission of nerve impulses. And we're talking about sort of more than pretty much a tenfold increase, if not more, in the speed at which a nerve impulse can be transmitted in myelinated neurons compared to neurons that don't have a myelin sheath. And there are organisms, and even within your body, have neurons that don't have a myelin sheath. Okay. Make sure you're happy with those notes. Pause the video here if you need to. So let's move on then and think about, well, how does this all fit together? Okay, so there's a coordination pathway, and there are these terms here you need to put in the put in the correct order. So give yourself a minute just to put them in the correct order. Let's check. So got some silly animation here. Did we start the stimulus? Then the receptor detecting that stimulus. So it could be light, and the receptor could be the rods or cones in your retina of your eye. Did you then have the coordinator? The coordinator is going to be the central nervous system or the spinal cord, depending on where and how complex the pathway is. And we'll look at that in a moment. Did you then have the effector, a muscle or a gland? And then the response, the thing that happens. Look at that, amazing. Okay. Make sure you've got that in the correct order. Maybe add some notes underneath in your box about what the stimuli might be, what the receptors might be, so repetition from last lesson, what your coordinators are, what your effectors are. Obviously the response will depend on the stimulus. Alright, so that's specific, but you could annotate underneath all of these. You could, if you wanted to, have like sensory neuron between the receptor and coordinator. You could have a motor neuron between the coordinator and effector, but this doesn't just apply to the nervous coordination, it does also really apply to hormonal control as well. Okay, so what I want you to do now is take some time to have a go at thinking about these nervous pathways. So these are all controlled by the nervous system, things that would happen because of what happens when you sit on the pin. What about if you saw a truck driving towards you as you were crossing the road? What about if you place your hand on something really hot? Try to pick up a tripod after you've been heating it and forgot that it was still hot. What about you smell something really nice cooking in the kitchen? Okay, can't see it, but yeah, really something really yummy you're looking forward to. Bright light shining in your eyes. You could actually do this by closing your eyes and then opening them, so the amount of light going into your eye increases suddenly. If you look in a mirror, you'll be able to do it. Okay, what happens? Okay, I'll give you a worked example to question 1. So sitting on a pin, we've always got to think about stimulus, receptor, coordinator, effector, response. So what's going to happen? So when you sit on a pin, you've got pressure or pain with that pin sticking into your skin. So you've got a pain receptor in your skin. It could be a pressure receptor, and that will send a nerve impulse to your spinal cord, and that will cause muscles in your leg to contract. Okay, so it needs to name specific muscles exactly, and the whole thing is that you stand up. Key things here: we've got an actual response, not just that it goes to the muscles in the leg, but what is the leg muscle doing? And then the response is a specific response to the fact that you have sat on the pin. Well, you don't want to stay sat on the pin, you want to stand up. Okay, now this is an example of something called reflex arc. If you sit on something painful, you will stand up quickly. Okay, so you'll do it automatically, don't actually have to think about it, and therefore it's an automatic response called a reflex arc. They're there to help protect you. Okay, so have 5 minutes, just think about the other 4 questions, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay, let's see what you got. So there's our pathway again to remind you. So you might have got something slightly different because you might have had different stimulus, but let's say you saw the trucks with light. So the light energy is going to hit your rods and cones in your retina. It's going to go to your brain because your eyes are closest to your brain if you think about it. And you will have some thought about this, but you're probably going to have to make a decision and do something, but you are going to send nerve impulses down motor neurons to the muscles in your legs, and you're hopefully going to run out of the way or step out of the way of the truck. Okay, you might also do something and scream. Okay, but this would be the thing that would keep you safe. You might also have here sound and the hair cells in the cochlea of your ear, so you hear the truck coming towards you. That might also go into this. You could have more than one stimulus. Putting your hand on something hot, so imagine picking up that hot tripod or putting your hand down on, putting your hand in something hot in the oven. And a number of times you go and get something out of the oven and your back of your hand touches the rack in the oven. You go, ow, pull it away really, really fast, don't you? So you'd have that heat which would probably stimulate pain, but thermoreceptors in the skin. This would be a really quick response. Would go directly to the spinal cord. It's the shortest route of the spinal cord as the coordinator, causing the muscles in your arm to contract. So for example, if the back of your hand touching a hot rack in the oven, your bicep would contract and pull that arm away. Okay, and lift your arm away. Lovely food cooking. So when food is cooking, so you think about frying food or baking food, what you're releasing is chemicals into the air. So you have chemoreceptors in your nose would detect that. They go to your brain, and it would probably cause your salivary glands to secrete saliva so that your mouth starts to water. Could also stimulate your stomach to start producing digestive enzymes like proteases and stomach acid as well. Okay, and bright light shining in your eye. In this case, clear stimulus is going to be increase in light. So you might put here high light intensity, not just light, just high light intensity. And your rods and cones would detect that high light intensity. So your brain would coordinate it, and the muscle you have in your iris, it's the coloured part of your eye is made of muscle, and we're going to do the eye later on. So obviously if you didn't get this, don't worry too much. But you have 2 types of muscle in your iris, which are called circular and radial muscles. And if you want to protect your retina from getting too much light in it, the circular muscles in the retina will contract, and actually the other ones will relax. The radial muscles will relax, and that will cause the sort of muscle size, if you like, of the circle of muscle in the iris to get bigger, which will constrict the pupil. So the iris appears to get larger, and the pupil, which is the hole through which light goes into is able to pass through to get to the back of the eye, will get smaller. Okay, you could flip this the other way. But what about if you go into a dark room where you have lower level of light detected by the rods and cones? So it will affect how the brain coordinates that, going, oh, there's less light I'm getting less nerve impulses from the eye, from the rods and cones. I need to let more light in, and that will actually cause different muscles to contract. It will cause the radial muscle to contract and pull the iris narrower, so the pupil gets wider and the pupil dilates. Okay, so actually you've got 2 different reflexes that can occur with the iris of the eye, and we will look at that in detail again when we do the eye. Okay, so these 2, remember, in the same way as the sitting on a pin, are both what we call reflex arcs, and they protect the body from harm or damage, and they're rapid and automatic responses. Okay, make sure you've got those ideas into your notes, and just in the last minute or so, just have a think about, can you answer these questions? Have a go at answering these questions to test yourself in the last few minutes of this session. Thank you.